This edition of Monocle on Saturday was first broadcast on the 14th of June 2025. Hello, I'm Georgina Godwin, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. This is Monocle on Saturday. Coming up on today's programme, we'll have a look through the week's news and culture with the screenwriter and broadcaster Yassmin Abdel-Magied. Then,
we are constantly looking at how can we compete with ourselves and how can we poke holes in what we're doing. And so it's a fun puzzle to solve.
And that is the CEO of the Wall Street Journal speaking to Monocle's Chris Chermak about the role that AI plays in the modern media landscape. And we talked to two bookshop owners to celebrate Independent Bookshop Week. That's all ahead here on Monocle on Saturday. First, though, the news. Iran and Israel targeted each other with missiles and airstrikes early this morning after Israel launched its biggest ever air offensive against its longtime foe in a bid to prevent it from developing a nuclear weapon. Iran has long insisted its nuclear program is for civilian purposes only. The UN nuclear watchdog concluded this week that it is in violation of its obligations under the Global Non-Proliferation Treaty. The investigation into the Air India plane crash, the world's worst aviation disaster in a decade that killed more than 240 people, is focusing on the engine, flaps and landing gear as the aviation regulator ordered safety checks on the airline's entire Boeing 787 fleet. The Aviation Ministry said that investigators and rescue workers had recovered the digital flight data recorder, one of the two black boxes on the plane, from the rooftop of the building on which the jet crashed. And Ye, the artist formerly known as Kanye West, made a surprise appearance at Sean Diddy Combs' criminal trial on Friday, expressing support for his fellow rapper as he defends against sex trafficking charges. Combs, who's also used the performance names Puff Daddy and P. Diddy, turned artists like Notorious B.I.G. and Usher into stars, elevated hip-hop in American culture and became a billionaire. And that's your Monocle Radio News. Hello and welcome to Monocle on Saturday. I'm Georgina Godwin and joining me in the studio is the screenwriter and broadcaster Yassmin Abdel-Magied. Yassmin, what a busy social book week this has been.
We have seen each other a few times, actually, because of it. It's been great. I mean, just last night, I was at a book launch at an independent bookshop, which was fantastic. There was obviously the Women's Prize, where I know you were at. And then we also saw each other at the launch of the Edinburgh International Book Festival programme. I'm super fortunate to be part of the... I'm a trustee of the Edinburgh International Book Festival. And for those who don't know, it's a 2-week book extravaganza. It's sort of right in the midst of the city during August, which is, Edinburgh's big month of comedy and performance and culture. And this year's, it's fantastic. Jenny Niven, the director, and the team have put together an incredible program of, I think, almost 700, if not more, events. They'll all be accessible as well, captioned or BSL, British Sign Language supported. And they're looking at the theme of repair. And that it's, I think, a theme that is even more relevant as the year sort of goes on. It's incredible. You've got sort of commercial and authors that'll pull in big audiences like R.F. Kuang and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and then you've kind of got people deep diving into lots of different themes. You've got the Ukrainian historian Olesia Kromchuk. Yes, exactly. The journalist Jen Strout. I could list all of the different names. It's very, very exciting. Pankaj Mishra, Omar Al-Khattab. There's fantastic. I will be there. I think you might be there. So it's going to be a great time. And we got to launch that with our partners, the Scottish Government, Creative Scotland, Also, all of this was happening at the British Library.
It was really good fun. And Jenny Niven then came in to chat to me the next day. So we're going to have a full rundown of what people can expect from Edinburgh Festival very soon. We'll be playing that out shortly. I mean, not today, but within the next few weeks, because the festival happens in August. As you say, that happened at the British Library. The British Library today, and indeed all this weekend, is a scene of huge activity because JLF in London is taking place. So that stands for Jaipur Lit Fest in London. So this is a very much Indian-looking festival, and it's. I'm just going to give you a few little highlights. Today I'll be speaking to Saad Mohseni, who runs a big media network in Afghanistan and now across the Middle East, and Lucy Hanna and Batul Haidari, who are both parts of this book called My Pen is the Wing of Bird and My Dear Kabul. So these are writings from women in Afghanistan. So we're really going to be looking at the role of media and of women in Afghanistan. It's called Broadcasts from Kabul. I'll also be speaking to the wonderful Namita Gokhale and Anu Singh Chowdhury, who's very well known in India for her screenwriting. We'll be celebrating, again, women in literature there and how you kind of reframe the narrative. And then what I'm very interested in tomorrow, Bruno Machis, who is the Portuguese former foreign minister, I think, David Rhodes, big media mogul here, Steve Tsang, of course, big China expert, Mukhalika Banerjee, a political scientist, Sashi Tharoor, who is an Indian politician, who I saw speaking brilliantly last night.
He's an incredible orator.
He is really wonderful. They're talking about crisis and the age of chaos. And in fact, last night he said, what did he say? He was talking about Indian words that have been taken into English. And one of the words he said the word loot. He said, you took our words before actually taking the spirit. But of course, all of these celebrations, some of them had to be delayed and very, very subdued. A moment of silence last night at the British Library in memory of the 240 plus people that died in this terrible Air India crash, the worst crash, aviation crash in the last decade. And just awful.
It is. I mean, I think it's terrifying, especially, as soon as I heard the news, I sort of messaged around, friends and so on. And there were multiple people who had family members or loved ones they were connected to actually on that flight. And so I think it's something that's kind of reverberating throughout the communities, because of course there are many Indians in the UK, there are many British Indians, there are many people connected, and so this is not, it's very, very close to home, and I think people are quite honestly reeling and still getting their head around it. And I think it'll be very interesting to see, the engineer in me is also curious. Is this a technical issue in the same vein that we saw with, Boeing has had issues over the last few years, time and time again, whether it was the 737 MAX and the kind of the reporting ended up showing that it was sort of a technical kind of glitch, and then they didn't train the pilots and so on. And then even prior to that, there were whistleblowers from Boeing talking about the fact that there was this push towards profit over technical excellence. I mean, Boeing, as somebody who studied mechanical engineering and who a lot of my friends did aerospace, Boeing used to be the kind of pinnacle of technical excellence. So it's really been fascinating to kind of see this decay over the last decade or so. And the question, I mean, we spoke about the black box being found, the question of what the technical issue or what the issue will be and how this will or won't change Boeing's sort of future, I think is very urgent.
Mm-hmm. I was chatting to Monocle's founder and chairman, Tyler Brûlé, yesterday, and he, of course, pointed out that Boeing doesn't make the engines, which I think is really quite relevant. But they found the black box now, one of the black boxes. There are always two, and looking at what's going to, obviously we're waiting for the data that's going to come out of that.
The thing that, I have a novel coming out next year called At Sea, and it's set on an oil rig. And one of the things about it, and the kind of themes running through, and something that I'm often interested in, is like when there is an incident like a big explosion on an oil rig or a plane crash, actually, and I've kind of sort of been talking about the technical thing, but often it is, how did human error come in and at what point did human error come in, right? And I think that's the interesting thing. And what systems often designed to do is to mitigate for that human error. And so again, like we shouldn't really speculate, but let's wait and see and find out what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. Yassmin, we can't talk about the news without obviously talking about Iran and Israel. And this is looking like we are entering a very dark time for humanity.
Yeah, it's really difficult to think about how to engage with what is happening at the moment. Obviously, overnight, we've heard about continued strikes, Iran's response, and both Iran and Israel sort of talking about this not being something that there doesn't seem to be much appetite for anyone to sort of to stop, right? There is incentive on both, whether on Netanyahu's side, war for him and his government is something that he can rally the people around. You can rally people around the flag. You can it is seen as a show of strength and so on. And also Iran obviously has this is a long-standing sort of dynamic and rivalry. I think the hope, of course, is that there is a way to de-escalate, whether that's, the United States putting more pressure on Netanyahu to de-escalate. Trump, I don't think is, he sort of came in with this position of wanting to stop wars and get out of wars, and his base is quite interested in not being involved in more. So I don't think he is particularly inclined to be pulled into a broader conflict throughout the Middle East. However, it is much easier to start a war than to stop one, right? It is much easier to instigate and initiate than it is to de-escalate. And so I think it's a very fast-moving situation. It is not clear which way at the moment things will fall.
Speaking to people on the Globalist yesterday, they were talking about the next 72 hours are absolutely key. What happens next, how Iran responds, how Israel responds. And of course, we did see a lot of response both ways overnight. Now, a lot of that is by drone. And drone, of course, controlled by AI. And so what I wanted to do was just bring you this conversation because earlier this week, the Wall Street Journal hosted its CEO Council Summit here in London. So Monocle's Chris Chermak was there, and he spoke with the journal's CEO Alma Latour about the importance of live journalism and about how media companies are dealing with artificial intelligence. Chris began by asking about the benefits of live journalism for a brand like the Wall Street Journal.
At a time when we have access to more information than ever before, where you can get that on command in summary form and can ask a natural language question of a machine, that can give you a lot. But the one thing that it cannot give you is triangulation between what's going on in people's minds and a fear factor, a level of excitement, little signals that humans emit. And there is a craving at a time of great change to share what we're collectively experiencing with others and try to come to an understanding of what we're facing together. And so that has made, it used to be known as an events business. I really think it's more networking or peer-to-peer learning. I think live journalism is one element of it, but it's really what happens off stage that makes things special. The conversation starter takes place on stage. That's the live journalism. But people want to connect with each other. And so if I just take my own little world, even in the past 24 hours, I've gotten new ideas. I've got many different business opportunities from unexpected quarters, connected people from very different parts of various industries. And so I think all that to say that for us, this is a key part of the success formula of Dow Jones and the Wall Street Journal.
It's about expanding your offerings, but I'm also curious, when you talk about networking, how does that feed back into the legacy newspaper, if you will, the legacy print side of the journal? How does, when you do an event like this, feed back into your newspapers and what you do on that day-to-day basis?
So it's really an affirmation of the brand. So back in the day when you would go into the town pharmacy, that would be one of the most trusted people in town because you would see that person a lot and they would give you their reasoning behind what you're getting. They would give you a word of caution about what medicine to use or not. And so in a way, we're bringing you that experience when it comes to how to interpret the world around you. You get actually access to somebody trusted or a whole bunch of people who are trusted or journalists. So you get to lift the veil and sort of say, oh, yeah. So not only do I have a relationship with the words, but these are the people behind the words. And very often what we find for a brand like ours, and I imagine for Monocle, it's much the same. These are people who experiencing us is more or less a lifestyle. They already know all the bylines. They know the background of certain reporters. And so they're very excited to get a deeper insights. And they also have an openness to learn more from us because they already trust us.
Now, you've also spoken about the dramatic changes in the media coming from AI. I know Dow Jones has reached a deal with OpenAI, but one of the things you did say on stage that I have to ask you about was all the other AI companies out there not necessarily working with legacy media companies and others. You called them thugs for potentially not being willing to work. And I'm just curious kind of how difficult that has been for you. How hard has it been to work with all these myriad AI companies out there that are using material from the journal and others? How do you get to a point where these companies are all actually cooperating and working with media outlets rather than against them?
So this is an industry-wide issue, and it's not just the Wall Street Journal or not just Dow Jones, right? And we got to go back in time here. What happened 15, 20 years ago, the internet has to be free. And I think in the media industry, very naively, a lot of companies made near fatal or ultimately fatal decisions to buy that principle and take smallish payments as what turned out to be a consolation prize for use of their content. And meanwhile, conditioning multiple generations to the false notion that news is free. We pay about $1.7 billion every year to produce the beauty that is the Wall Street Journal news offering and Dow Jones news offerings and the reliability of that. If you take that away and disseminate it without our permission, you are taking that investment away from us. And so we believe in making sure that we can secure that value. Now, your question is, can you scale that effort? And you got to pick your battles, and you got to choose where you make your point and how you make your point. I think as a general statement, I want everybody to be aware, if you are ripping off content without our permission or without a commercial agreement in place, you're at risk for us to come after you. And then it will have to be settled in court. We are much more interested in striking commercial deals and working together to craft what will be a new form of user interaction. Already is, but will change so much more. I think we can do great things together. I can tell you that working with OpenAI in context of the deal that News Corp has struck with it makes it much easier to have conversations and share ideas if you have a forward-looking model that takes monetization into account. Now, not all of this situation can be blamed on new technology or on platforms. I think by and large, the media industry has also displayed at a minimum flashes of lethargy, unwillingness to change, naive behavior, reliance on old business models, unwillingness to give up failing businesses, unwillingness to confront the fact that many of the brands are no longer trusted. And so there's got to be some introspection as well. And that also goes for introspection. The need for introspection is something that is an always-on state at the Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones. It's very easy. We just had the best year revenue-wise and profitability-wise in our history. But that, I think, puts me on high alert as to what are we missing, right? And it's very easy to get comfortable because it's at that point of comfort that the media industry a decade ago, 2 decades ago, could not imagine a world without it. And so we are constantly looking at how can we compete with ourselves and how can we poke holes in what we're doing. And so it's a fun puzzle to solve.
And that was Alma Latour, who is the CEO of the Wall Street Journal, who's speaking to Monocle's Chris Chamak. Yassmin, what do you think? Yassmin Abdel-Magied, who's still with me in the studio. What are your thoughts on AI and how it impacts on your work?
Oh, the Pandora's box opens. Get me on any evening and I will give you a 15/half an hour minute rant on this. I think, so there's a couple of different things. I think number one, and it was alluded to in that interview just there, part of what I get frustrated by is that we have now we have accepted a status quo where companies have built products that have profited kind of illegally off all of our work and all of our data. And I do think that needs to be repeated in names because, my books, my work, all of, the writing that I have put on the internet over the last 15 years have gone into these, like you can go into you can go to ChatGPT and say, write this article in the voice of Yassmin Abdel-Magied, and it will, because it has been trained on my work. And I think there is something, if we think about the labor movements of the Industrial Revolution, post-industrial revolution and so on, there is real work I think that we still have to do to be able to wrench back our kind of creative labor and the value of that creative labor from those organizations. So that's one piece. I think there's this other piece that's okay, we're in this situation now. How do we deal with it responsibly? And, we have spoken about this before. I think there is a prerogative for us to be using private, secure versions, open source versions where we can. We've talked about Maple AI on Monocle before. I would also recommend, if people want a private verifiable option, there's something called Tinfoil, which is a new version which you can actually download onto your phone as an iOS app in the same way that you can with ChatGPT. And it is private. They hold no data. So I think there is something for us to think about in terms of how we use it ethically. But to answer maybe the question you're really asking, I think as somebody whose main work at the moment is producing creative output, I find that it is not always a very useful, the chatbots and, large language models are not often very useful for me in terms of a final product. What I might occasionally use it for is if I want to sort of bounce ideas back and forth and I don't have somebody to speak to or whatever it might be. And whatever it gives me back might not be that useful, but it sort of sparks something else. And so I use it as a tool in that way. However, I'm also, as you say, I'm a screenwriter, I'm an author, I'm somebody who, doing journalistic reporting and so on. So it's I'm not necessarily the target market. What I think is fascinating is, I have friends who are journalists who sort of do, news desk work, for example, where they might be sort of taking something that's already written, rewriting it. That kind of thing might actually be, might not exist in a couple of years. Friends who are copywriters, there are actually lots of jobs that will, I think, evolve, but I don't think that we will have them eliminated. I don't think there will be no work in the future, right? And I think that's important.
Exactly, because I think you're absolutely right in that one never uses it for the final product. You would never cut and paste straight from what AI tells you. But it is useful in terms of efficiency, maybe doing a deep dive into something, read these 15 articles, summarize the key points for me, that kind of thing. I find it very useful in that way. But as you say, it's not to be entirely trusted.
Yes.
And it does have to have that human element. And yet nobody wants to hear something that isn't in your voice.
Exactly. And I do think there is something also about how do we teach that critical thinking? Because you and I might be able to, have that sort of approach that's a little bit cynical that says, let me double check what it said, let me make sure. But if you're a 15-year-old child using it to write your essay, right? How are we teaching people to engage with these products? I think it's really important that that's something we think about in the future.
Yeah. Now, in a moment, we're going to talk about Independent Bookshop Week. But before that, I just want to have a very quick look at something you've written for Starling, about Starling.
Yes. So this is a piece I've been working on for a little while now, and it came out in the New Lines magazine because essentially Elon Musk, even though he probably doesn't realize it, has had quite a big impact on Sudan in two different ways. On one end, he, him and his Doge department were kind of responsible for the gutting of USAID, right? And that took a huge chunk out of the aid support on the ground. I mean, there were some reports that were saying 80% of the community kitchens had to be shuttered. But on the other hand, Starlink, so the constellation of satellite communications that his company SpaceX is responsible for is the primary method of communication. And in fact, in many places, the only way people can communicate in Sudan. And my question was, how do we balance these two competing ideas? Like, how do we feel about Elon Musk's Sudanese diaspora when he is the only reason I can talk to my family, but at the same time, he's responsible for potentially famine and death. And so this is what the piece is kind of looking at. And it's been fascinating to kind of hear the responses, because for a lot of people who aren't aware of that dynamic, they're like, Elon Musk is definitely, a terrible person. We can't engage with it at all. But a lot of people who have family in Palestine, family in other parts of the world that are difficult to communicate with say, actually, yeah, this is a nuance and a dynamic that is hard to admit to, but is also the reality.
Yassmin, that's absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much indeed for that. Now, we're going to go back to books, because this is the thing that unites us. But Independent Bookshop Week begins today, and it's so important that we support these indies. So I've got a couple of guests on the line. Carolyn Bain, who's the owner of Afruri Books, and Helen Tamblin-Saville, who's owner of Wonderland Bookshop. Many thanks to both of you for joining us. Helen, I wondered if we could start with you, because I understand the decor at Wonderland Bookshop is absolutely extraordinary. Tell us more.
Good morning. So, our name is Wonderland Bookshop, and the shop is really designed to be a real-life wonderland. So it's super immersive. When you come in, we've got an upside-down tea party hanging upside down on the ceiling. We have an upside-down chess set. We have a tiny little door to represent the door that Alice goes through when she steps into Wonderland. Upside-down rabbit going, up into his hole, if you like, rather than down on the ceiling. So everywhere you look, it's really immersive, and everything's a little surprise when you look around.
That sounds absolutely unique. Carolyn, your shop too is completely unique. It's in Brighton. It's the UK's only bookshop dedicated to Black authors and their stories. How important is it to have a community like this?
Oh, I mean, it's everything, isn't it? There is so much underrepresentation in books that, it's a haven, I guess, for me and certainly for lots of our customers.
And are you finding that your customers come from all different races?
I mean, we're in Brighton, which is an 85% white city. So we have a lot of non-Black customers and customers that come from pretty much all over the southeast to come and discover the shop and see it in real life. So we have lots of customers that engage with the online bookshop, but then come for a day out, books by the sea. What could be more beautiful?
Absolutely. Helen, why are independent bookshops so important?
We're important because we are, we're right embedded in our community. We know our customers, we know our young readers. We work the community, we try to do really nice things. When people are having a bad day, they sometimes pop in just to say hello, have a cup of coffee and talk about it with us. And that's something that independent bookshops can do. We really get to know our customers. They're not just customers, they become friends. And by building up those relationships, we can do fantastic work with schools, local charities, etc., to try and really get, really increase book accessibility as well.
Carolyn, I wondered if you could give us more details on Independent Bookshop Week, what it is, how it's being celebrated.
Well, I mean, Helen just summed it up so much, hasn't she? Just bookshops are just at the heart of community. And so when we celebrate Independent Bookshop Week, we're really celebrating our communities and the amazing communities that we serve and the value that independent bookshops bring to those communities. Helen's talking and I'm nodding away going, yes. We're just here, we're counsellors, we're friends. My birthday party this year looked very different than it did before I owned a bookshop. And so many of our customers become our friends because we're here for the community. We're here listening to the community so much. And just so many other booksellers I talk to will say that the events that they do are really about what the community is telling them that they need. So we're so much more than books. Books often seem, I have to often remind myself, I sell books. Oh yeah, that's what I do. Because there are so many other ways that we can, we're not just plopped into communities. We're almost always there because we love the communities that we serve and that we're in and that we're a part of. And so celebrating that in Independent Bookshop Week, celebrating not just books, but books are very important, but celebrating the role of bookshops in Independent Bookshop Week is just, I mean, why wouldn't you? We should celebrate it all year round.
Yeah, absolutely. Helen, how much of a threat are the big online booksellers?
Oh, that's a really good question. I know it's something, I'm not going to lie, it's something that we all fear. Wonderland Bookshop is a children's bookshop, and that happens every week, even most days, to be honest. People come in and they look at the price and say, can you price match certain can you match online retailers? But putting that aside for a moment, I really try to focus on the community benefits that we can offer, and by by embedding ourselves in the community, making friends with our customers, offering different events, working to get free books to schools. We've got our free book box running today for Independent Bookshop Week. We're showing that yeah, okay, we may not always be able to compete on price, although sometimes we can, but we can offer so much more beyond. That. It's about the social benefits
Absolutely.
that we can offer, and people are starting to, and people I think realise that, and they want to see bookshops in their communities. And we know the amazing work that Carolyn does down in Brighton with that as well.
Thank you both very much indeed. That's Helen Tamblyn-Saville, owner of Wonderland Bookshop, and Carolyn Bain, owner of Afrori Books in Brighton. Independent Bookshop Week begins today. Do celebrate it by going to your local indie. We understand that for some people, buying online is the only option, but for that, bookshop.org exists, and bookshop.org works in the same way as other big online retailers, but they make sure that they order the books for you from an independent bookshop. So can't recommend more highly those courses of action. We're back with Yassmin Abdel-Magied. Yassmin, independent bookshops, just a godsend to so many people.
Truly. And I was just thinking as I was listening to those interviews that I have my local bookstores that I'm friends with the booksellers. I'll go and they sort of know my taste. I'll go in and they'll recommend things in particular. Also, as an author, it's lovely because you develop a relationship that is also about, yes, like obviously you want to sell books, but it's also kind of, it's part of the community. Like writing can be a lonely thing, and reading is an isolating thing. So the way that books can kind of bring people together in independent bookstores, I was actually thinking it's sort of in a way in a world, I mean, I don't know where our listeners are, but in the UK, for example, public libraries have been gutted over the years. I think independent bookstores sort of play a similar role to the public library kind of service in a community, right? You sort of come in, you might not even, especially with an independent bookstore, you might not even buy the book, but you sort of go in, you spend some time, you think about stories, you connect, and there's nothing quite like it.
Absolutely. And big shout out to the booksellers themselves, because these are often usually very educated, very knowledgeable people. You're not just talking to somebody who's taking a temp job in retail. This is somebody who knows their stuff.
Yeah.
And there's nothing I enjoy more than being in a bookshop and you can hear somebody asking for recommendations, and I'm afraid I always sidle over and go, well, I think this one or that one. And if you're interested in this, you might like that. And it's just lovely to lead people to these different places where everything kind of starts sparking.
100%. And also, I think a bookseller's kind of recommendation always feels so much more kind of personalized and on the money than, an algorithmic recommendation online, right? There's something about, not an Amazon's, if you read this, you might like this, but actually a bookseller being like, oh, this is why I really connected with this book, and the little note that they might have, on the shelf or whatever. So I do think this whole conversation's made me think I really need to go to a bookstore, right? Not that I need to buy any more books. I have no more bookshelf space in my house, and yet I will. I
know. Well, if anybody knows somebody that makes brilliant bookshelves, do tell me, because I'm about to convert my daughter's bedroom into this massive library. I've kicked her out. And
I'm so jealous. That sounds amazing. Yeah.
Anyway, so if we've got one message to leave you today from Monocle on Saturday, it's this: wherever you are in the world, there will be an independent bookshop near you somewhere. It's probably struggling a little bit, and it can probably give you much more than you can give it. So we do ask you to support them, please. That's all for this edition of Monocle on Saturday. Very many thanks to my guests, Yassmin Abdel-Magied, Helen Tamblyn-Saville and Carolyn Bain. Thanks also to our producer and our studio engineer, Mariella Bevan. Monocle on Saturday returns at the same time next weekend. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.